Okay, so welcome back, everyone. So obviously one of the lovely things about the fact that we were able to extend this over 2 days because it grew so much when we brought it online is that we've been able to incorporate a roundtable discussion. So we'd like to take this opportunity today to talk about television. And more specifically, we want to talk about how the multi-platform era and all of the sort of production and distribution shifts that it's initiated have perhaps impacted on TV's relationship to nostalgia. So obviously, as a domestic medium, TV has long been sort of tied to nostalgia, but obviously as viewing practices have changed, potentially that relationship is also changing. So that's what we'd like to unpack here today. So we've brought together 4 excellent researchers in the area of television studies. So I'm just going to go ahead and introduce each of them, right? And then we will jump straight in. So there's Kim Akass. Kim Akass is a professor of radio, television, and film at Rowan University. She's co-edited and contributed to Reading Sex and the City, Reading 6 Feet Under, Reading the L Word, Reading Desperate Housewives, and Quality TV, Contemporary American TV, and Beyond. She's one of the founding editors of the television journal Critical Studies in Television, the International Journal of Television Studies, managing editor of the website CST Online, as well as with Janet McCabe, series editor of the Reading Contemporary Television for IB Tourists. She's currently researching the representation of motherhood on television for a forthcoming book, From Here to Maternity, Representations of Motherhood in the Media. Okay, Amy Holdsworth is a senior lecturer of head of film and television studies at the University of Glasgow. Her research focuses on television and domestic media as interdisciplinary objects of inquiry, and her work has drawn upon theoretical traditions and frameworks within memory studies, childhood studies, and disability studies. She's the author of Television, Memory, and Nostalgia, and co-editor of Discourses of Care, Media Practices and Cultures. Her most recent monograph on living with television will be published by Duke University Press in 2021. Marika Yenner is a senior lecturer in media studies at Anglia Ruskin University. Her research is focused on contemporary television, television genre, and streaming. Her edited collection, Binge Watching and the Future of Television Studies, will be published by EUP in 2021. Her previous work includes the monographs Netflix and the Reinvention of Television and American Detective Dramas. And finally, Elke Weissmann is reader in television and film at Edge Hill University. She has published on transnational television drama and feminism, including the co-edited collection Renewing Feminisms. She's currently working with Tricia Dunleavy on a British Academy-funded project investigating the transnationalization of high-end television drama production in the multi-platform age. Okay, so what I'd like to do is I'd like to just begin by asking each of you an individual question, which is sort of related to your particular research. But after each of these questions, I'll give everyone else an opportunity to jump in if you have anything that you want to contribute, because obviously there's a lot of overlap between your research. Okay, so I'm going to start with Amy. So Amy, you've previously argued that TV is a deeply nostalgic technology in many senses. So it's associated with ritual and routine, with the domestic, and it marks our memory of global events, among other things. So given this, its connection to the construction of identity, both personal and collective, through memory is quite obvious. And so what I'm wondering is, in what ways might this be kind of changing in the digital era? So how might there be continuity or even evidence of attempts to preserve these connections between TV, nostalgia, and memory in the multi-platform era?
Okay, shall I start now?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, go for it, yeah. Thank you for the introduction and the question. We did get these questions before Christmas, so I have had a chance to give it some thought. And I haven't done much thinking of late, I have to say, because I've been trapped in a largely management role since August. So it's nice to be able to sort of return to some of these questions. But there are kind of three fairly broad points that I wanted to make in relation to your questions. The first is about a kind of continuity of the context in which we view TV. The second is about the kind of multiplications and layers that we get in the kind of contemporary television landscape. And the third is really to think about what watching television during lockdown has revealed as well. So I think obviously that connection between television and nostalgia has always been underpinned by, for me anyway, that relationship to ideas of home and forms of kinship. So television primarily, though not exclusively, experienced within the home and, as you said, amongst rituals and routines of the everyday and the domestic. Nostalgia as historically associated with the idea of home and feelings of longing and belonging. And I think a third concept here is the uncanny, I think a key concept here, but I won't go into that now. That's probably a different conference. And there's obviously been a lot of discussion in a kind of contemporary TV studies about platform mobility, about increased autonomy of viewers, and whether or not we've been released from the tyranny of schedules and broadcast flow, or whether, you know, that's a loss to television communities. But I think for me, television remains embedded and embodied in home cultures and practices, and still very much part of our daily flow of everyday lives. Now, this is obviously a more privatized and individualized kind, but it still, for me, really determines and underpins the ways in which we use television and the kinds of memories and nostalgias that then form around it in relation to those kind of memory networks that exist within the home. The second point then is about kind of multiplications and layers. And Kathy Johnson's recent book, Online TV, I think is really good at illustrating how this has come about in the kind of online era. And the tables in her book are really useful at seeing all those layers that we have, the different ways in which we can access and different ways in where we're getting television from. And I think during the first lockdown as well, I think we see the ways in which video streaming subscriptions exploded, but so did ratings for broadcast TV as well. You know, and I think the latest Prime Minister's address being watched by 24 million or something like that. But also, obviously, as you've seen across the conference and the different papers, this is also a point about the opening up of an access to past television and media content as well. So television has obviously always been dominated by practices and forms of repetition. And I think lots of the presentations in the conference have illustrated the way in which our kind of access to digital content increases our capacity to place things alongside one another. So we get those kind of layers, that kind of sedimentation or palimpsests of kind of media content and imagery that allows us to think very, you know, in depth about kind of forms of recontextualization, forms of repetition and difference, and the kinds of nostalgic modes that come out of that. So forms of kind of a nostalgic spectacle, for example, I'm thinking about the paper yesterday on Jurassic Park, the way in which we can place the past and present alongside one another. So these kind of technologies also have, in a sense, clearly increased perhaps and clearly illustrate that comparative function of nostalgia. That's become a kind of methodological thing in a way in which we can compare directly the past and the present.
Yeah.
I think thirdly, lockdown TV, I think, has really kind of crystallized the role of television in our lives and the way in which audiences kind of navigated the experience of the lockdown and the kind of affordances of television, certainly, and again, to return to the kind of nostalgic pleasures, the television as a source of comfort, familiarity and routine. And I think one of the things that's been celebrated as part of this were the kind of interventions of public service broadcasters. There was various Twitter things going on yesterday about the announcement by the BBC to put more educational content on its kind of broadcast channels, and this was like public service broadcasting at its best. You know, so there's a nostalgia, I think, in that celebration of public service broadcasting and seeing what it can and can't achieve. But I think also the kinds of effective communities that public service broadcasting can build and foster. So that takes us right back to those kind of nation binding principles of TV. Certainly, I know I was one of the people that during the first lockdown would be there kind of weeping as everyone's clapping for carers. You know, you see the montages of various home audiences on TV. And certainly, again, the nostalgia around, I think, the value of public service broadcasting that certainly was re-energised at a moment when the BBC really, to use a Scottish phrase, was on a kind of sugary peg, and still might be post-pandemic as well. But I think whilst we can kind of celebrate the kind of deep comforts of nostalgia, it's also worth remembering, I think, Roger Silverstone's work and those kind of early theories of TV around and its dynamics of anxiety and security. So whilst on one hand, it might be patting us on the head and soothing us, it's also generating a lot of the anxieties that we turn to nostalgia as a response for as well. Finally, I think alongside the kind of multiplications and layers is something that I've been preoccupied with is the kind of loopiness of television as well. And nostalgia itself as a longing for a home to be returned to in a future represents that loop between past, present and future that television is completely wrapped up in all its kind of textualities and temporalities. And I think this, again, the pandemic and the lockdowns, we're now in the third version of lockdown, we're trapped in this loop as well. And in a way, there's something specifically televisual, I think, about it, that if we think about the characteristics of television and nostalgia TV in particular, you know, the kind of resets, the repeats, the remakes, the returns. I was watching the new series of Staged last night. Again, I can return to a kind of scenario, but in a slightly different twist. That those kind of characteristics of television are kind of increasingly reminiscent of our kind of social lives. And I suppose we might, in this sense, think of the pandemic as a kind of nightmarish soap opera or even sitcom. Yeah, so that's my long response to your question.
Thank you. That's fascinating. Do any of the others here want to add anything on this?
I kind of just want to follow up on a point that Amy made with a question in terms of like when we're thinking about the renationalization of television or more or less I don't know, and I don't like, sorry, I'm not putting this very well. So I'm just thinking about how the pandemic in general is kind of like bringing out very, very nationalized ideas in terms of like, obviously we're all more dependent on our national, or more consciously dependent on our national governments than before. So I'm kind of wondering how that ties in with not just the BBC, but generally kind of like these different layers of television that you've touched on.
Yeah, sorry, I've just got cramp in my foot.
Oh, it's
kind of distracting me a second.
If I could jump in,
I would just say, I think the other layer, the other immediate layer is obviously Brexit. I think, you know, so I think you're entirely right. Those discourses of nationalism and nostalgia. You know, we get this layering of what's happening with the pandemic alongside what's happening with Brexit and the kind of messiness that leaves us with. That we, you know, you've seen with obviously with the poor hauliers stuck, you know, in Dover over Christmas and things like that, but also the fact that, you know, the virus doesn't respect borders, you know, in that way that we have this fantasy of what a border should and shouldn't be. Sorry, Kim, you're going to say.
I was just going to add, because as you all know, I'm in America at the moment, and that's the very thing that I miss about TV is that kind of public service broadcasting. You know, this bringing together of a nation, because here it's just not here. And I reject the networks daily and kind of go on to streaming all the time. So it's a very different from, you know, from Europe as was, And I think most people that I know that are living in England, we still feel ourselves as European. But over here, we don't have that. There is no national TV. There's PBS, but it doesn't fulfill the same function. So that's something that I really miss, just kind of sitting with the BBC or whatever the equivalent is in Europe, and just having that feeling of being part of a nation. And it's just not happening. I mean, this, as you all know, it's all splintered and destructed over here. So, we don't have that. So that's, my nostalgia is for British and European TV, even though American TV is my subject. How weird is that?
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Let's move on. And Mareike, I want to ask you a bit about binge watching. So your research is focused on changes in viewing practices afforded by streaming services like Netflix. So I'm interested in particular in your analysis of Netflix's standardization of binge watching and how it challenges the linear television schedule by creating what you're calling an insulated flow and restructures TV's relationship with time. So I'm wondering what might be the impact of these structural changes on TV as a nostalgic medium and on how we experience the past in nostalgic TV genres.
I think so, and I'm sorry, I'm like less structured than Amy in my response, but I think there are several layers again to this. I think first of all, Amy made a really good point in terms of like, obviously there's a personalized scheduling going on, and this still kind of fits our personal rhythms, which, considering how work is structured for the vast majority of us, it still kind of like complies with these rhythms. I'm definitely very Netflix centric in my analysis in general. So like obviously there are other streaming services, but Netflix is like the one that has very, very much relied on this structure of binge worthiness or bingeability or insulated flow or however you want to call it. I would say in certain respects, I mean, Netflix, I would argue Netflix structures viewing. It doesn't have a schedule, but it does structure viewing. So there's a seasonality to releases. We still get Christmas films. In fact, we all get an American tradition of Christmas films. We also get like Halloweenish stuff, which I mean, I think some of this has been delayed now because of the pandemic. So Chilling Adventures of Sabrina was just released, but it's relatively obvious they kind of wanted to release it for Halloween. And obviously Netflix productions are running in trouble as well here. I think there's also this thing of television as a nostalgic medium, and the way I've conceptualized binge watching before was via the concepts of control and choice, particularly within a neoliberal structure. So control is basically saying when you watch what on what device, and choice would be the amount of programs that you get. And within a neoliberal structure, choice can be, there is such a thing as too much choice, which obviously is what the algorithm is trying to mitigate. But what I find interesting for a while in the discourse is really how important things like The Office or Friends and all of that are, because to me it actually kind of signals that we're using the choice in order to re-experience past programming. And on as kind of my last point, on a different level, Netflix is also obviously using nostalgia as a textual level as well. So in Stranger Things, for example, where it appears to function as part of a transnational strategy, in terms of invoking the pop culture of the past. I mean, it's not any real past it's invoking, but that's not what nostalgia is about anyway. So you have like invoking a lot of pop culture of the past, which works mostly in Western countries. It doesn't work in a lot of countries, largely because they didn't have the imports from America at the time. But at least as a stylistic feature, it kind of like seems to work to communicate across cultures, and also to kind of depoliticize the context. So you make a lot of really, really gadgety references to Ghostbusters, but you don't actually say anything about, oh, by the way, we're in the 80s here. So Ronald Reagan never says the word AIDS, by the way. So like you don't actually kind of like work through anything that's historic. You more or less work through something that's nostalgic, which is like the way that Netflix works through these structures with time and the experience of time via mediation of through the text.
Yeah, that's really interesting how you're bringing in the kind of transnational thing, which does actually lead on well to what I wanted to talk to Elke about. But does anyone want to kind of jump in on any of that before we proceed?
There's two things that I think. One, I want to add how, in a way, the press, but also, so the press also plays, and the national press plays a role in that kind of creation of a national unity, even for binge watching actually as well. So if you think about how, you know, when you were saying seasonality in relation to the releases on Netflix, how we engaged with The Crown, you know, it seemed to be like we all had to watch it now. I still haven't watched it. I'm not sure if I will, because I hate The Crown with such passion. I'm sorry. Basically, it's also really interesting in regards to The Crown, then, how precisely this mediation of the past that we now actually have experienced, a past that we can remember, is actually challenging our nostalgic views of that time. I wondered if you wanted to say anything about that, Mareike.
I think there's something so interesting going on with The Crown, and I think like, first of all, there's a national conversation, but at the same time, I'm actually kind of, I keep wondering whether this is made for Britain at all, because like obviously this came out when like right after Downton Abbey, which obviously also was an international success. So again, I mean, to me, like The Crown seems like so flattened out and so depoliticized that it speaks much, much more to a transnational audience that kind of like experienced all this stuff and kind of like gossip magazines and all of that. Rather than an actual national conversation about something. Like it just plays out very differently than a similar series would play out on the BBC. And I think in terms of the seasonality, I think one of the things that Netflix has done is fall into like a trap of ratings have to be here and now. Because obviously, like actually, if you're saying I'm not having a schedule, you can check your ratings a year after if you want. But because of industrial imperatives, which obviously are also there for Netflix, they've kind of fallen back in terms of like you have the opening weekend numbers and you had like the cinematic model of opening weekend or like the first week or something. So it really matters that we all watch this stuff right away, because otherwise there won't be another season, which mobilizes a different kind of conversation than you would have it if you would actually take advantage of the self-scheduling.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, anyone else want to kind of jump in on that, or shall I move on? All right, okay, I'm gonna move on to Elke now. So your work is concerned with transnational TV drama, and I know that at the moment you're working on a joint project that looks at these productions in the multi-platform era. So are these recent shifts in TV production affecting how national pasts are told for transnational audiences, and how traditional national TV systems are addressing their audiences in stories about the past? And we've obviously kind of touched on that a little bit already just now, but I know you're currently interested in how this is playing out in recent German TV programs like Babylon Berlin. I obviously betrayed yesterday my particular interest in that show, so you're welcome to consider it from that angle if you like.
Yeah, I think one thing that I'm always really, really careful of is that we fall into a myth or into a trap of believing that things have completely changed because things have changed industrially or anything like that. One of the things that really strikes me about high-end drama is that how long it has been really, really transnational, and that was precisely what, you know, my book was trying to make an argument about. But Michelle Hilm's work shows that, you know, this transnationalism, particularly between Britain and America, has existed for years and years, and similar transnational relations exist in other countries. Think of the Scandinavian countries, think of the German language, geopolitical kind of environment, etc. What has changed though is that on the high-end level, television drama has obviously become so widely distributed that new forms of relationships can be formed, such as for Babylon Berlin between the public service broadcaster of Germany, ARD, with Sky, and in particular Sky Atlantic, which obviously wants to model itself on HBO, which again is, you know, complex in a transnational relationship. So what we have seen and what we're actually looking at the moment is how these interrelationships are becoming, to a certain extent, Americanized, actually, and how things in that regard, in Germany in particular, lead to significant changes. In Germany, I think one of the things that I should say, Germany is kind of quite unusual because its television has always been quite bad, and I think Mareike would agree. So German television isn't particularly well known for being very forward-looking. You know, the stuff that has made it internationally, like Schwarzwald Clinic, is an adaptation of the Dallas phenomenon in many ways, but transplanted into the German situation. Heimat, which was made by a filmmaker, I only discovered after coming to the UK. So Heimat was a bigger success story in the UK than it was in Germany, even though obviously the Germans remade it several times. So there's something quite strange going on where German television is very conservative, and the way people look at German television as well is as this incredibly bad object. So if people think of television as a bad object in the UK, in the USA, or somewhere, you haven't been to Germany, honestly. Like, I'm still having conversations with friends about how long children of the age of 6 are allowed to watch television. 10 minutes maximum, if you want to know. So this is, you know, Germany is really strange. But what happened, and this is where, in a way, Mareike's work will be really interesting as well, was that the really successful HBO shows weren't available on German television. you couldn't watch them on German television. And so a lot of Germans streamed them illegally. And there's a whole generation of Germans who are a little bit younger than me, but not massively younger than me. So, say 30 to 40 approximately, who really kind of showed that there is an interest in television, but not the kind of television that you could get on German TV. So the German industry started to change, basically. And one of the changes that have happened is that the film production companies have become more involved in producing German TV. And that includes X-Film, yeah? And Tom Tykwer, who was, really, really famous for his work in German film rather than German TV. He then moved over to America, where he worked with the Coen brothers on Fargo, came back and set up a similar production style for Babylon Berlin. But in that whole process of producing something about Germany in the 1930s, early 1930s, late 1920s and early 1930s, so the run up to Hitler, basically, he manages to look at it the team look at it very nostalgically in many ways, because they draw on, precisely as he said, all those conventions from Weimar cinema in so many ways, and not just expressionism, but also the Kammerspiel, etc. But interestingly uses this nostalgia in a quite progressive way in order to reimagine German history in such a way as to suggest there was more going on than what we've heard about so often again and again, and that Hollywood is always showing us. And Heimat was already a kind of an attempt to countervene in many ways, namely, the Germans were the ones that killed all the Jews. Yes, that's what we did, but there was more going on, and it was a much more complex situation, basically. And I think so nostalgia here is really used in such a way as to enable a new generation of Germans to engage with the past in order to think about what their future could be. Yeah, that's me.
That's really interesting. Does anyone want to kind of jump in on that? Anything to add? No? Okay, well, let's move on, and I'll ask Kim a question. So, Kim, your work is focused on contemporary quality TV drama, often in the context of how these programs have contended with questions of gender. So do you think that recent shifts toward multi-platform, transnational TV production, things we've been talking about, might be opening space to bring to the fore gender, racial, and other identities in previously marginalized visions of the past? So in part by giving voice to directors like Ryan Murphy and Ava DuVernay, who are keen to sort of explore these on TV, and even also sort of complicating old ideas of quote unquote quality, right, and its associations with more traditional period drama, which sort of traditionally or historically excluded these identities.
Really good question, and I just want to say thank you for inviting me onto the panel. It's really nice to see old friends, British, German, Europeans. It's lovely. It's a really good question, and it's something that I've been really focusing on, because clearly this is one big research trip for me, kind of really experiencing American TV. What I would like to pick up on, and while I talk about it, is what Elke just said about this reimagining of, what else was going on before the war, that kind of thing. What's happening, I think, over here is that we're getting the same thing in America regarding race. And there's this kind of going back. So I don't know if you've all seen Lovecraft Country, for example. What a great series. It's my big recommendation. And they go back to the kind of infamous riots, and now it's gone out of my head where they were, where loads of people got killed. Watchmen focus on it as well, but it's about the racial issues. What I'm particularly interested in is the fact, and again, I've completely forgotten her name, the new showrunner. She was given this whole series by HBO, a black woman, untried, untested for them. And then she turned the book into this beautiful adaptation, which is so seeped in the time that these huge riots, this is so embarrassing. It's just got out of my head. I was all prepared and it's gone. But she sets it in that time. So you've got this lovely old cast, fantastic costumes. But what she does is she kind of infuses the book with a female perspective, and it's very subtle. But towards the end, it kind of gathers pace. And at the end, you just get this enormous kind of femaleness about it, just through the way she's retelling the story and restaging it. And part of it is, going back through the generations. And so it reminds me of Charmed, where the mother and the grandmother come back as ghosts, and kind of that nostalgia for time past. And that's what Lovecraft Country does at the end. So it kind of, it brings to the fore a history that nobody really knows about, and reimagines it, and then kind of inflects it with this gendered prism, if you like. So it's one that, thank goodness it's on HBO Max, so I can go back and watch it again, because I'm going to be writing about it. So I think the thing with gender is, I was kind of looking yesterday, and I always go back to Martha Lowson and her boxed in reports about TV and the celluloid ceiling, and they come out of San Diego State University. It's been going for, I think, like 20 years, over 20 years or something. And every year they release the numbers of the people working in TV. And, my central argument is that until we get women behind the scenes, directors, writers, producers, the gender balance is never going to be any different, because you tell the stories that if it's white men running the productions, those are the stories that we're going to get, and we're not going to hear about women's history. So I can put the links up to these sites. The bad news is nothing's really changed in general. In fact, the figures have got worse, though. Let's, no surprise there, 2% down from last year. However, when you look at streaming programs, it's a totally different story. They're just as streaming, so Netflix and all the ones that are outside the main network, 42% of streaming programs had identifiable sole women. And anyway, there's something like 47% of women in creative roles now in the streaming platforms. That has just gone up hugely. It's jumped from the last year. So that's really good news. So for us, I think we can look for women. We can look at streaming shows are going to have more female creators, which will then have that inevitable knock-on effects, that even if it's not, I don't like the idea that it's a feminist TV show, but, it'll just be more women's stories and a view of women from women's point of views, which are just so important. But if you look across, those numbers flatten down. And so cable channels and networks in America are still, surprise, surprise, dominated by men. And I just think, I've got a feeling that won't change. I think, in every country, that if it's men that are in charge, they're never going to let the women in. They're never going to let in women writers. They're never going to let women DPs in. But with the streaming sites, they need women, they need anyone, they need content. And, I was thinking this morning, it's like the Second World War, where all the men went off to the front and they said to the women, okay, you can now come and do your jobs. Here's your childcare. We'll get your shopping for you and all of that. It'll be fine. So all the women get let back into the office and they get taken out of the home. And then after the war, surprise, surprise, they get pushed back into the home. My worry is that's what's going to happen with streaming. But I think it's getting so big now, and TV is so huge. And, you know, as we've heard, transnationally, it's huge. And there are, you know, programs that everybody watches across the globe. It may be that they need the personnel, so they will allow women in. But they certainly have. Over the last year, it's jumped up. It's like 47% of women in creative roles, whereas all across the board, it's something like, you know, 35%.
Right.
So I just always think, you know, that's important.
Mm-hmm. Elke, yeah, you want to jump in?
Sorry, I've got a question. Kim, do you know anything about if the networks are similar to Netflix in that they want to keep all copyrights? Because that was one of the reasons why Michaela Cole ended up doing I May Destroy You for the BBC rather than Netflix, because she wanted to keep part of the copyright.
Great question. That's my next stage. Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And, you know, what's really interesting is I May Destroy You came out on HBO. And of course, we all know HBO have, you know, historically got that link with the BBC through Rome and, you know, other shows before. So I always, Janet and I, you know, I've worked with Janet so long now that we kind of think as one brain. I hope she doesn't mind me saying that. But, you know, we always argued that HBO was kind of the public service broadcaster of America because, you know, it had so many shows that you would never have on any other, certainly not on the networks. You know, you certainly wouldn't have the shows on the networks. Mm-hmm. So I think, you know, there's a point there that, you know, there's a lot more freedom. They've always said it. It's nothing new. Everybody says to work for HBO, you've got the freedom. So obviously she's gone through the BBC and HBO haven't insisted on that. But I still think, you know, having lived here for a while now, I still think HBO are very different. You kind of have to put them on one side. And the streaming platforms are just different. It's just a different thing. You know, HBO kind of went through that blip. And now I think they're coming back because they are opening the doors to international collaborations, even bigger than before. So, you know, you can always guarantee that if it's from the BBC, it will turn up on HBO. So, you know, I've found that really interesting since I've been here. You know, I think the thing with gender is and nostalgia, you know, that I think it's problematic. And again, it's something that I'm really aware of in America is the issues with race are just appalling. And I'm sure everybody's seen what's been going on. It's terrible. So I think it's kind of more than gender. It's about ethnicity as well, and allowing Black and brown women to come into the forum. And I think the problem is that, and I've said this, I say this in my book, for every, you know, so you can look at the figures yourselves. It will say, you know, Black women, oh, there's, you know, 3% more Black women this year. And then you'll look and you'll find that there's 3% less white women. So it's not like they're actually giving any more space to Black and brown women. And Latinas are so underrepresented on American TV. Mm-hmm. So, you know, that's the thing. Race is the issue here.
Absolutely, yeah. Does anyone else want to kind of jump in on this before we move on? Okay, so I think I'm going to ask one more question. I'd like to actually just bring genre into this a little bit. This is just sort of to anyone who wants to answer, obviously, because this is genre nostalgia. And then after this question, then maybe I'll see if anybody else has some questions that they want to pose to you. But I just want to ask you guys, so we're seeing an increasing number of genre programs that are actually set in the past. So, you know, Mareike brought up Stranger Things. There's also been Legion. There have been, you know, shows that kind of are fantasy shows, right? Like Game of Thrones or His Dark Materials, right? But are using the aesthetics of the past. And there are also a lot of other shows that just kind of have this sort of vague sense of aesthetic pastness, you know, like Sex Education. So I'm wondering, like, do you think that we need to sort of rethink the function of the past in contemporary TV, given its sort of use in all these different genres now?
Sorry, so I've been kind of, I think largely because my research recently has focused on action TV, and action TV is kind of those genres that just kind of functions as a meta genre, so it just straddles other genres by kind of through like one factor that is completely overriding it. And I'm actually thinking of nostalgia in the same way, in terms of it doesn't function on the same level as traditional genres. It functions more through a specific style that kind of like comes in, and then you have nostalgic teen series, then you have nostalgic action series, you have nostalgic detective series, all of that. So it doesn't necessarily change the generic belonging, but I mean, with working more with hybrid genres in general, so it kind of makes sense to me that the newer genres we establish now kind of function on that level.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Stranger Things, sorry.
No, go on.
For Stranger Things, Trisha's made a really good argument in her book that Stranger Things is really an example of how you basically aim a program at a young audience while also keeping the older audience engaged. And it's an attempt to kind of, by Netflix, which has, particularly in the early days, attracted primarily younger audiences, but obviously, if we go back to Kathy's work, Kathy Johnson's work, she's now found that basically all the generations seem to be streaming now as habitually as well, as part of the lockdown. So but Stranger Things is a really good example of bringing the new generation or keeping the new generation interested in Netflix as a streamer, while also bringing the older generation in through nostalgia. So this mix of sci-fi and nostalgic viewing of the past might be a particular industrial strategy in order to combine audience groups, actually. Absolutely,
yeah. I think both Amy and Kim had.
Oh, go on, Amy, you go.
I mean, I'd say that it's been a continual strategy. I think if you look back to things like Nickelodeon and Nick at Night, so those nostalgia cycles have been, embedded, particularly in American TV, with kind of syndication practices. And Eric Compere's work is really good at thinking about that. But I think the other thing I'd just say is not everything set in the past is nostalgic. So I think we need to be careful about how we use nostalgia and what we mean by it, and I think it's really hard to pin it down sometimes, because it can be so slippery and it can be so playful. But being, as scholars, being more specific about when we say something is nostalgic, what do we mean by that?
Agree, yeah,
absolutely.
Kim,
so I just want to come in. Sorry, Elke, The Crown. Going to go back to that. Nostalgia isn't always a good thing, is the other thing, because we didn't watch The Crown this time until very recently. It was like over Christmas, nothing else to do, we'll watch it. I quite enjoy it, but part of the reasons that we didn't want to watch it is because it's got Thatcher in it. Margaret Thatcher. Who would ever want to revisit the Margaret Thatcher years? And it was a real struggle to kind of get past that. So nostalgia can be painful, and it can bring up really bad feelings and just awful feelings, because I grew up through the Thatcher years. It was dreadful. But what kind of came over for me was Gillian Anderson was so wonderful in that part that it was absolutely compelling. And so there's this other layer that goes on that Gillian Anderson, Miss Havisham, X-Files, Sex Education, all of that. She turns herself into Thatcher. How do you do that? And so that's kind of really pleasurable to see, and a really excellent piece of acting, character acting. It's, obviously she isn't Thatcher, but it makes it bearable So there's all these different levels going on that, you know, I find Charles and Di as well, you know, I remember all of that. And it's fiction. It is not true. But even so, it's kind of, I love these fiction woven around true characters to see how they're represented. So, you know, I just wanted to say nostalgia isn't always pleasurable. Definitely. It can be very unpleasant. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And again, I suppose that does sort of prove what Amy was saying, that we do have to, think about, you know, what we mean when we use that term. Okay, I think for the last 10 minutes or so, let's see if anyone else has any questions. Does anyone have any questions they want to put to our speakers here? You can type them in the chat, or you can raise your hand. I have more questions myself, but I feel like...
Oh, Tulsa. Thank you, Lindsay Hallam. It's Tulsa, and it's Misha Green as well. She's come back to me. It's just come back. Thank you.
Oh, we've got, can I ask something? Yes, Iona, you can. Go ahead.
Hello to everyone. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for this discussion. And I was wondering about the theme of the panel and the whole conference. Can we link? Can we say that nostalgia in television is another way, perhaps, of talking about in a large sense, intertextuality in the theories of literature. Intertextuality not only in the narrow sense of a text linked to another text, televisual text or audiovisual, but with in a sense of intertextuality regarding our cultures, different aspects of cultures, not only references from one text to another, but as layers of different memories, things, beliefs, something like that. I'm thinking about the book of Torres about the déjà vu that said the future was yesterday, something like that. Or in reference with the work, with one part of the work of Derrida saying that the past or the memories of the past or the archive is not only shaping our perceptions of the past, but forms also the present and the future.
Yeah, I'd like to say that we're always, you know, there's so much need for TV at the moment that the TV creators are just plundering. You know, we go back, remakes, you know, it was interesting yesterday, the paper on Little Women, and I can't remember who gave it, but it was a great paper. But, you know, to look at how many versions of Little Women there are. And I think for me, it feels like we're coming to the days of theatre, you know, where you go and see, I don't know, Swan Lake by whatever his name is. What's wrong in my brain today? Matthew Bourne. But you'll go and see his Swan Lake, or you'll go and see somebody in a Shakespeare, or somebody has, you know, directed this version of Romeo and Juliet. And I like to think that, you know, TV now, we're getting to that place where we're kind of remaking and plundering old genres and twisting, you know, and it's that thing about familiarity and difference. And I think that, you know, that everything is linked. And I think we're getting to that point in TV where we're kind of going back in order to go forward. And, you know, so is that, you know, yesterday, tomorrow's yesterday, but it's, you know, the thing about remake of X-Files, Twin Peaks, you know, going back, it's that, and I always say it's like a 30-year cycle that you can see things begin to be repeated 30 years later. So at 20 years, Sex and the City was over 20 years ago. And now we've got on Netflix, Emily in Paris. by Darren Star, which is, you know, the new Sex and the City. It's not, but I'm really enjoying it. It's like, you know, really.
But it's definitely marketed as that. Like
Exactly.
I kept thinking, because like Emily in Paris brought out all these discussions about ambient television, which like annoyed me to no end, just because it's ambient television. We know this, but I just kept thinking, like a lot of these discussions just come up because of Netflix tagging, and because Netflix tagged like Darren Star as a creator of quality TV, it like shows up in all of those journalists' lists.
Yeah, and you know, in fact, watching it, it's more like The Devil Wears Prada than anything else. It's got more in relation to that than Sex and the City. So, you know, but you're right. It's how they tag it. It's the algorithms. It's how they sell it. And they think if they put Darren Star on it, that it's going to sell. So,
So we're getting a lot of questions coming in to the chat. And I think we may only have time for one more. I'll just ask the first one here. But obviously, you guys can have a look at everything that's in the chat here. There are a lot of interesting things coming in, but this is from Kate Egan. So she says, thanks all of you for a fascinating discussion. Elke, you mentioned that the nostalgia in programs like Stranger Things can be seen as an industrial strategy that brings in older audiences. Would you say that's also true of the many of the older programs that Netflix have acquired? So for example, older comedy programs like Monty Python, which is now exclusively owned by Netflix, or as Mareike mentioned, Friends and The Office.
So Elke, do you want?
No, you go first.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great observation, because I totally agree, like particularly when Netflix didn't have that much content to offer. I mean, now they have huge amounts of their own content, but that's when they acquired Friends. So Friends was very much a strategy for them to kind of like position themselves within different countries, and was very much part of their transnational strategy, because I think it was like around 2016 when they acquired it, and 2016 was like a period of vast global expansion for them.
I find it really interesting with Friends in particular, but also in a way the same can be said about Monty Python. I never watched Monty Python when it was originally on because I was a baby, basically. But you know, you encountered it at a later stage as this cult object, and so there's an element of, you know, in the way that I encountered it, there was so much nostalgia added to it through the people that I spoke to it, and through whom I got to know the program in many ways. And I wonder if a similar thing is true for Friends, because Friends is watched a lot by young people. And one of my dissertation students at the moment is actually looking into audiences of Friends on Netflix, and in particular the younger generation. So I'm really looking forward to finding what she's found in that regard. But you were saying about that as well, weren't you, Mareike, that Friends has particularly attracted younger audiences rather than you know, people like myself who watched Friends when it was originally on, but now it's kind of, yeah, I've seen it, I don't have to see it the 10th time because it was repeated so much on E4 anyway.
If I could just chip in to add to that, is that, you know, I've had a teenage daughter and she's older now, but they all watched Friends, all her and her friends, and they would have it on in the background. It's like having the radio on for us. So Friends becomes something else. And I remember when it went onto the streaming services and everyone was saying, oh, it's misogynistic, it's homophobic, it's fattist, it's sexist. Well, maybe so, but you know, it was made in the 90s, and the kids that are watching it aren't really seeing that. They're just seeing a really excellent script, and it is really excellent. You go back, there are still episodes that make me laugh out loud, even though I've seen probably all of them about 10 times because of my daughter. but it is, so I wonder, I'd be really interested to know what the dissertation student comes up with, because it's how people use Friends as well. You know, I always know my daughter's in the house when I can hear Friends, I hear the theme tune, and I know she's watching it, because it's for her chill out TV. She doesn't have to work. You know, she can just let it go. Oh, this is the episode where, you know, the way they title the episodes is brilliant, because that's how it's remembered.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'd be interested in that.
Okay, I think we're gonna have to wrap it up here. Like I could talk about this all day, and obviously there are a lot of interesting other questions coming in the comments. So I mean, I think we're probably just gonna stay here through the break when we have a break later, rather than going back to Discord, because that wasn't working very well. So we can maybe kind of, you know, take up these discussions again. But thank you so much to our 4 speakers today. That was a really fascinating discussion. So thank you to all of you. And I suppose we will now move on to immediately onto our next panel. Thank you.
Thank you. See you all.
Bye. See you.